Dusk had just fallen, and the fiery red sunset bathed the cabin of Flight 392 from New York to Chicago in golden light. Lena Brooks strode down the aisle with rare confidence, the sharp rhythm of her black patent leather heels tapping against the carpet, a declaration of her presence. Lena, a black woman with natural curls cascading proudly over her shoulders, wore a perfectly tailored deep blue blazer that hugged her slender frame. The black silk dress underneath accentuated her long legs, and in her hand she carried a sleek leather briefcase along with a neatly folded boarding pass. Her deep brown eyes scanned the rows of seats, searching for 3A, the first-class seat she had booked weeks in advance, a well-earned reward after months of relentless work as a strategic consultant for major corporations. First class was unusually quiet today with only a few scattered passengers. A middle-aged businessman typing away on his laptop, an elderly woman with reading glasses flipping through a fashion magazine, and a young man fast asleep, headphones covering his ears. Lena smiled slightly as she placed her briefcase in the overhead compartment, her movements graceful yet assertive. She settled into seat 3A, pulled out the small table in front of her, and opened a leather-bound notebook. The pen in her hand glided swiftly across the pages, capturing the last of her thoughts for an important meeting in Chicago. No one seemed to notice her, or at least that's what she thought. But this moment of peace was only temporary. Vanessa Reed, the chief flight attendant, emerged from the back of the cabin with a rigid stride, like a wind-up doll set in motion. Her navy blue uniform fit snugly, but her face was tense, lips pressed into a thin, cold line. Her pale blue eyes scanned the passengers like a security scanner, sharp, assessing and full of judgment. When her gaze landed on Lena, a flicker of a frown crossed her face, as if she had just spotted something out of place. Vanessa stopped in her tracks, hands on her hips, locking eyes with Lena, not with curiosity but with barely concealed suspicion. "Excuse me," Vanessa spoke, her voice razor-sharp yet wrapped in a thin veneer of politeness. "May I see your ticket?" Lena looked up, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. She paused her writing, set her pen down and offered a small, composed smile, just warm enough to be polite, yet unwavering in confidence. "Of course," she replied, her voice smooth and steady. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and handed Vanessa the ticket without hesitation. Vanessa snatched it from her grasp with an unnecessary roughness, as if she were picking up a piece of trash. She flipped it back and forth, her narrowed eyes scanning for a mistake, a flaw, anything out of place. "First class, seat 3A, Vanessa muttered, skepticism laced in every word. Then she looked up, her gaze sharp. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Lena tilted her head slightly, maintaining her composed smile. "I'm quite sure, I booked it myself. Is there a problem?" Vanessa didn't respond right away. A smirk of disdain flashed across her face before quickly vanishing. "There's no problem," she finally said, though her tone contradicted her words entirely. She tossed the ticket back onto Lena's lap carelessly, letting it land crumpled on her black silk dress. "I just needed to check. Too many people try to sneak into first class when they don't belong here." Her words, laced with venom, landed like a sharp dagger. The air in the cabin grew heavy. A few passengers glanced up from their laptops and magazines, their curiosity piqued. Lena picked up the ticket, smoothing it out with her slender fingers. A flicker of something sharp flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with an eerie calm. "I understand," she said evenly. "But I trust my ticket is valid. Feel free to check again if you must." Vanessa scoffed, a dry, brittle sound like breaking glass. "I don't need to check again," she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "I know exactly who belongs here and who doesn't." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "I suggest you get up and move now before I have to do it for you." Vanessa's words were like a poisoned arrow, aimed straight at Lena. The atmosphere in first class suddenly grew heavier. A few passengers glanced up from their laptops and magazines, their curious gazes turning toward the two women. Lena picked up the ticket, smoothing it out with her slender fingers. A sharp glint flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by an eerie calm. "I understand," she said evenly. "But I believe my ticket is valid. You're welcome to check again if you wish." Vanessa let out a dry, brittle scoff, the sound escaping her throat like shattering glass. "I don't need to check again," she said, her voice sharp with arrogance. "I know exactly who belongs here and who doesn't. You need to get up and leave this seat right now before I have to do it for you." Lena took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the small table in front of her. She wasn't someone who lost her temper easily, but Vanessa's blatant rudeness was testing her limits. I have every right to sit here, Lena said, her voice now firm though still remarkably composed. If you think there's been a mistake, call a manager or check the system. But I won't move just because of your feeling. Vanessa stepped in closer, so near that Lena could catch the faint scent of cheap perfume clinging to her uniform. Oh, so you want to be stubborn? Vanessa hissed, leaning down until her face was mere inches from Lena's. Her icy blue eyes flickered with rage, like a cornered beast about to strike. I already told you, you don't belong here. Stand up now or I'll make sure you regret it. The tension in the cabin thickened, suffocating like the air before a storm. The middle-aged businessman stopped typing, turning to watch with a mix of irritation and intrigue. The elderly woman with reading glasses whispered something to the young man beside her, who had just woken up and was pulling off his headphones. But Lena remained still. Her gaze locked onto Vanessa's, unwavering. Are you threatening me? Lena asked, her voice low and sharp as a blade. Vanessa didn't respond. Instead, she suddenly snatched the ticket from Lena's hand once more. This time, using both hands to tear it into shreds right in front of her. Tiny white fragments fluttered to the floor like snow in the wake of Vanessa's fury. Now you have nothing left to prove, Vanessa sneered, triumph dripping from her voice. Get out of my seat, you fraud. Headphone, welcome to Soul Deep Stories. Glowing star, if you're immersed in this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another heart-touching tale. Sparkling heart. Pushpin, here's a little challenge for you. Comment below and let me know which country you're listening from and what time it is. For example, I'm in New York, USA, enjoying this story at 9 p.m. Crescent Moon. What about you? Let's connect from all over the world. Globe showing Europe, Africa sparkles. Speech balloon, don't forget to like and share to spread these meaningful stories to more people. Thank you for being a part of Soul Deep Stories. Red heart. Vanessa's actions were like a ticking time bomb, shaking the entire first-class cabin. A middle-aged businessman shot to his feet, shouting, "What is she doing? Is this how first-class passengers are treated?" The elderly woman shook her head in disbelief, clutching her chest. Lena, though shocked, maintained her composure. She looked down at the scattered fragments of her torn ticket, then lifted her gaze to meet Vanessa's. "You just made a huge mistake," Lena said, her voice cold as ice, each word slicing through the air like a dagger. But Vanessa wasn't finished. As if caught in the whirlwind of her own madness, she spun around toward the small service counter in the cabin and grabbed a freshly brewed cup of coffee. With a swift, almost violent motion, she flung the steaming liquid directly at Lena. The dark brown liquid splattered across Lena's deep blue blazer, seeping through the silk fabric of her dress and leaving searing patches of heat against her skin. The scalding sensation made her shudder slightly, but she didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she gripped the armrest tightly, her brown eyes burning with a controlled fury. "Filthy fraud!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking with unchecked rage. "Get out of here now, or I'll have security drag you out like a dog." She pointed toward the back of the plane, her face flushed red, her breath coming in ragged gasps as if she had just run a marathon. The first-class cabin erupted into chaos. The businessman stormed toward Vanessa, shouting, "Are you out of your mind? I'm suing this airline." The elderly woman shot up from her seat, her frail hand trembling as she pointed at Vanessa. "In 70 years, I have never witnessed such disgusting behavior." The young man pulled out his phone and began recording, muttering under his breath, "This is going viral." Meanwhile, Lena remained seated, despite the burning coffee on her skin and the bitter scent rising from her clothes. Slowly she stood up. She reached into her bag, pulled out a napkin and calmly dabbed at the stains on her blazer. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if preparing for a battle Vanessa didn't even realize she had already lost. "You want me gone," Lena said, her voice low but commanding. "I'll leave. But you should know, this isn't over." Vanessa let out a harsh, piercing laugh, the sound grating against the tension-filled air. "Who do you think you are, threatening me? You're nothing but a loudmouth with nowhere to go. Get lost. I never want to see your face again." She crossed her arms and stood in the aisle, her stance daring anyone to challenge her. Lena said nothing. She quietly picked up her leather briefcase, stepped over the torn pieces of her ticket, and walked toward the economy cabin under the stunned gazes of the passengers. Whispers broke out. A few people stood up, seemingly ready to intervene, but Vanessa snapped, "Sit down. This doesn't concern you." Her aggressive outburst kept them in place, but their eyes, ranging from outrage to sympathy, remained locked on Lena. When Lena reached the economy section, she selected an empty seat in the middle, placed her briefcase on the floor, and sat down with perfect posture, her head held high. Her clothes were still stained with coffee, but her expression was utterly unmoved. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, typing a short message. Something happened. Be ready. As the message was sent, a small, knowing smile played on Lena's lips, not the smile of defeat, but of someone holding the strongest card in the game. In the first-class cabin, Vanessa turned back with a triumphant smirk, wiping her hands on her apron as if she had just accomplished a grand feat. She glanced around at the remaining passengers and barked, "What are you all staring at? It's over. Stay quiet." But their eyes did not hold obedience, only silent contempt and outrage. Vanessa had no idea that, in this very moment, she had dug herself into a hole too deep to escape. And Lena Brooks, the woman she had just humiliated, was about to bury her in it, using nothing but her own arrogance. Lena Brooks sat quietly in the cramped middle seat of the economy cabin, the dim overhead light casting a glow over the dark stains of coffee splattered across her deep blue blazer. The bitter scent of burnt coffee mixed with the stale air of the cabin, filled with the sounds of wailing children and passengers grumbling. She was wedged between a large man snoring heavily on one side and a skinny teenager blasting music through his phone on the other. But Lena paid no attention to the discomfort. Her sharp brown eyes, honed like a freshly sharpened blade, were locked onto the screen of her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly, typing out a new message, each keystroke a precise arrow aimed directly at a target Vanessa Reed didn't even know existed. The first message had already been sent the moment she sat down. Something happened. Be ready. Now, as the plane hummed steadily through the air, she continued to type, her words cold and razor-sharp as an undeniable command. Check the situation at headquarters. I need everything on Flight Attendant Vanessa Reed, background, disciplinary records, all of it. And have the legal team ready. We're not letting this slide. She pressed send. The glow from her screen illuminated her face, highlighting the quiet but dangerous smile that curved her lips. Lena was not a vengeful person, she wasn't petty like that. But she was also not the kind of person to let someone trample on her dignity without consequences. In first class, Vanessa Reed was still reveling in her imagined victory. She strutted around with an air of arrogance, the scent of coffee still clinging to the apron she had used to attack Lena. "What are you looking at?" she snapped when she caught the disapproving gaze of a middle-aged woman with dyed blonde hair shaking her head in disgust. "It's done. Go back to your books or take a nap." Her voice was sharp, almost a hiss, daring anyone to challenge her. But no one spoke. Vanessa convinced herself that she had handled the situation flawlessly, removing an intruder from a space she believed was reserved only for the worthy. What she didn't realize was that beneath her aggressive exterior, she had just lit the match that would set her entire career on fire. Lena set her phone down and leaned back into her seat. The man beside her snored rhythmically, but it didn't distract her. In her mind, a plan was already forming, each move falling into place with the precision of a master chess player. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to cause a scene, that wasn't her style. Lena knew that real power lay in control, in silent moves executed so flawlessly that the opponent was already defeated before they even realized they were in a game. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to smother the lingering anger in her chest. The heat of the coffee had faded from her skin, but the memory of Vanessa tearing up her ticket, dousing her in coffee, and spitting vile words at her still burned, like a wound refusing to heal. A younger, gentler-looking flight attendant than Vanessa approached. She had dark brown hair tied up in a high ponytail and worried eyes. Her name tag read Clara Evans. Clara leaned down, her voice soft as if afraid of disturbing Lena. "Ma'am, are you all right? I can bring you a wet towel or something to help clean up." The sincerity in Clara's voice made Lena smile slightly, for the first time since the incident. "Thank you," Lena replied, her tone warm yet carrying an unmistakable firmness. "I'm fine. But if you could bring me a glass of cold water, I'd appreciate it." Clara nodded quickly and hurried off, as if trying to make up for the cruelty her colleague had inflicted. Lena watched her go, recognizing a small glimmer of light amidst the storm Vanessa had created. Not everyone in this crew was like Vanessa. The cold water arrived swiftly, placed on the tray in front of Lena with a shy smile from Clara. "If you need anything else, just let me know," Clara murmured before retreating, a hint of guilt flickering in her eyes before she disappeared toward the back of the cabin. Lena picked up the glass, taking a slow sip, letting the cool liquid soothe her throat and some of the tension in her body. But her mind never stopped working. She reached for her phone again, checking for updates from her team, a loyal group she had spent years building, people always ready to act when she needed them. The first message came from James Carter, her legal assistant. "I've contacted headquarters. They're reviewing Vanessa Reed's records. Looks like she's had complaints about her attitude before, but they were never handled seriously. I'm preparing paperwork in case we need to press charges." Lena nodded in satisfaction, scrolling to the next message from Maya Torres, her personal secretary. "The board has been given a preliminary report. They want you to call as soon as possible. I've scheduled an emergency conference call for 8 p.m. tonight." Lena glanced at her watch, a little over an hour to go. Enough time to prepare. She quickly typed back. "Good. Keep digging into Vanessa. I want everything, from the day she was hired to the last time she was reprimanded. Inform the board I'll call on time." Setting her phone down, Lena's gaze drifted to the airplane window, where soft white clouds floated past under the fading golden light of sunset. Outside everything seemed peaceful. But inside her a storm was forming. Not one of chaos, but one carefully controlled, ready to sweep away anything in its path. Back in first class, Vanessa was starting to feel an uneasy sense of dread. She stood by the small service counter, a tray of orange juice in her hands, but her eyes kept darting toward the economy cabin. Lena's silence, the way she had walked away without protest, made Vanessa restless. She had expected a shouting match, an embarrassing scene she could easily shut down with her authority. But Lena had denied her that opportunity. Her composure, like an unbreakable wall, left Vanessa feeling small without even understanding why. "What's with her?" Vanessa muttered, turning to Derek Miles, a veteran flight attendant standing nearby. Derek, with his salt and pepper hair and calm demeanor, simply shrugged. "You're asking me? I didn't see her do anything wrong." "Are you sure you're not mistaken, Vanessa?" Vanessa growled, slamming the tray of drinks onto the counter. "Mistaken?" She didn't look like she belonged in first class at all. She dressed like she was trying to look fancy, but I know people like that, completely fake. Her voice was sharp and filled with disdain, but Derek only gave her a disapproving look. "And what exactly are you basing that on?" Derek asked, his voice low but firm. "Her ticket was valid. Did you even check before acting like that?" Vanessa froze for a moment before turning away, pretending to busy herself rearranging the drink trays. She didn't want to admit that she hadn't checked the system. That everything had been based on her gut feeling, or more accurately, a deep-seated bias she would never dare to acknowledge. Derek shook his head and returned to his duties, but he knew one thing for certain. Vanessa had just put herself in serious trouble. Back in economy class, Lena couldn't hear the conversation, but she didn't need to know what Vanessa was thinking. She had encountered too many people like her, people who judged others simply based on their appearance or background. But this time, Lena wasn't going to let it go like she had in the past. She pulled out her leather-bound notebook and quickly wrote in black ink. "The greatest enemy of prejudice is the truth, and the truth will be exposed." She underlined "exposed" twice before snapping the notebook shut, a decisive movement as if declaring war. The plane shook slightly as it hit a patch of turbulence, and the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ethan Hayes. We are cruising at 35,000 feet and are on schedule for an on-time arrival in Chicago. Please keep your seat belts fastened and enjoy the rest of the flight." His steady voice filled the cabin, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside Lena, not because of the flight, but because of what she was about to do once they landed. She picked up her phone again and dialed a number she knew by heart. The call was answered on the first ring. "Lena? Is that you?" The voice on the other end was deep and authoritative, slightly raspy. "Richard Hale, chairman of the airline's board of directors." "Yes, it's me," Lena replied, her voice low but precise. "I was just humiliated by one of your flight attendants on flight 392. Vanessa Reed tore up my ticket, poured coffee on me, and kicked me out of first class despite my valid reservation. I want this handled immediately." Silence. Then a long heavy sigh from Richard. "Are you serious, Lena? This isn't a small matter." "I never joke about things like this," Lena said, her voice now sharp as a blade. I have witnesses, everyone in first class saw it happen. And I'm sure some of them have recorded it. Do you want me to send the video to the press, or will you handle this yourself? A slight tremor crept into Richard's voice. No, that won't be necessary. I'll call the captain right now. What do you want, Lena? Name it. Lena smiled, but it was the smile of a predator ready to strike. I want Vanessa Reed suspended the moment we land. I want a full investigation, no cover-ups, no protection. And I want an emergency board meeting to review the airline's entire policy. This isn't just a personal issue, Richard. This is a systemic problem. You have 1 hour to start handling it, or I'll take matters into my own hands. Richard swallowed hard, his voice quieter now. All right, Lena. I'll take care of it. But can you at least stay calm? I am calm, Lena replied, her voice like ice. But I am not lenient. You know who I am and you know what I can do. Don't make me prove it. She hung up, placing her phone down, then turned back to the window. The clouds outside were now painted in fiery orange hues, but inside Lena, a darker fire burned, not one of destruction but of rebirth. In first class, Vanessa had no idea that her fate had just been sealed. She went about her duties, chatting and smiling at a wealthy passenger as if nothing had happened. But back in economy, Lena Brooks held the strings of fate and she was ready to pull. Vanessa might think she had won, but she didn't know that the real game had just begun, and Lena never lost. The plane glided through the final stretch of clouds, the fading sunset giving way to the thick darkness of the approaching night. In economy class, Lena sat straight, her sharp gaze locked on the time ticking away on her wristwatch. More than 30 minutes had passed since her call with Richard Hale, and she knew that the wheels of justice, or at least the version of justice she could control, were already turning. But in first class, Vanessa Reed was still blissfully unaware, lost in her illusion of power, not realizing that the ground beneath her feet was about to crumble. Vanessa stood at the small service counter, a tray of wine glasses in her hand, her red lips curved into a smug smile as she spoke to a wealthy passenger, a man in a gray suit with a gleaming Rolex on his wrist. You see, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, we have to maintain high standards here. Not everyone belongs in first class. The man chuckled, nodding approvingly, completely oblivious to the fact that Vanessa had just sealed her own fate with those very words. Then suddenly the cabin intercom crackled to life. Attention crew, this is Captain Ethan Hayes. I need Senior Flight Attendant Vanessa Reed to report to the cockpit immediately. This is an urgent order. His stern, commanding voice was a stark contrast to the usual announcements. An uneasy silence fell over first class. Passengers looked up from their drinks and magazines, curiosity and concern flickering in their eyes as they turned toward Vanessa. Vanessa frowned, slamming the tray of wine down with a sharp clank. What the hell is this about? She muttered, irritation creeping into her voice. She turned to Derek Miles, who stood nearby, his expression unreadable. Do you know anything about this? Vanessa snapped, her tone now razor-sharp. Derek shrugged, his salt and pepper eyes regarding Vanessa with an unusual coldness. I don't know anything, he said evenly. But if the captain is calling you up, it's definitely not for praise. A faint smirk flickered on Derek's lips, but Vanessa didn't notice. She was too busy maintaining her facade of arrogance. She flicked her hair, striding forward with false confidence, but as she neared the cockpit, her steps grew heavier. A vague sense of unease coiled in her chest, like a small serpent wrapping around her heart. She knocked on the cockpit door, and when it opened, Captain Ethan Hayes stood there, his expression as hard as stone. Beside him was the first officer, a young man whose eyes darted away, as if not wanting to be involved in whatever was about to unfold. Vanessa, Ethan said, his voice low but weighted like a hammer. Come in. We need to talk. He gestured for her to step inside, and as the cockpit door shut behind her, the sharp click of the lock sounded like a death sentence. In economy class, Lena felt the shift in the air. The announcement hadn't escaped her notice, and she knew that Richard had kept his word. She gazed out the window, her expression calm, but beneath the surface, a tide of satisfaction surged. She didn't need to be in the cockpit to know what was happening. She had made her move, and now it was time for Vanessa to feel its weight. Inside the cockpit, Vanessa crossed her arms, trying to maintain an air of defiance. What's so urgent, Captain? She asked, her tone laced with challenge. I was busy serving first-class passengers. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He settled into his seat, turning to face her with a gaze so cold that it made Vanessa shiver despite herself. "I just got a call from headquarters," he said, his voice even but sharp as a blade. "From the chairman of the board himself, Richard Hale. Do you have any idea why he called?" Vanessa frowned, her heartbeat picking up speed, but she forced herself to appear indifferent. "No," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I was doing my job, maintaining standards on this flight. What could possibly warrant a call from the board?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, his gaze locking onto Vanessa like a hawk eyeing its prey. "He called about you, Vanessa. About what you did to a first-class passenger, Lena Brooks. Do you want to explain first, or should I tell you what I was told?" Vanessa's face drained of color, but she quickly forced herself back into her usual aggression. "Lena Brooks? That girl?" she scoffed. "She didn't belong in first class. I did the right thing. I controlled the situation, removed someone who wasn't worthy. I had every right to do so." Ethan's palms slammed down onto the control panel, the thunderous sound making Vanessa instinctively flinch and step back. "You're right," he roared, his voice now laced with barely restrained fury. "You ripped up her ticket, spilled coffee on her, and kicked her out of first class just because you thought she didn't belong? Did you check the system? Did you call a manager? Or did you act like a lunatic, driven by your own prejudices?" Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her breathing grew rapid, her chest tightening as if it were being crushed. Ethan continued, his voice now lower but still sharp as a blade. "Lena Brooks is not just a first-class passenger. She's a major shareholder in this airline, and she has direct ties to the board of directors. You just insulted one of the most powerful people on this flight, and now, thanks to you, the entire plane knows about it." Vanessa's face turned ghostly pale, her hands trembling uncontrollably. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice breaking with panic. "How was I supposed to know? She didn't look like what?" Ethan cut in, his eyes blazing with fury. "Like someone rich? Like someone powerful? Or like what you think qualifies as first class?" He leaned forward, his voice cold and final. "You just destroyed your own career, Vanessa, and I can't save you." Vanessa stumbled back, her spine pressing against the cockpit door. Her legs felt like jelly, her mind spinning. But I was just doing my job," she whispered, her voice fragile like a lost child. Ethan shook his head, disappointment and contempt flickering in his eyes. "You weren't doing your job. You abused your power, you humiliated a passenger, and now the consequences are here. When we land, security will be waiting for you at the gate. You are immediately suspended, and I suggest you prepare yourself, because this is just the beginning." Vanessa collapsed to the floor, her back against the door, her hands covering her face. Choked sobs spilled from her throat, but Ethan remained unmoved. He turned back to the control panel, signaling the first officer to resume their work, as if Vanessa no longer existed in that space. Inside her mind, everything shattered. Her arrogance, her confidence, and her belief that she was always right. She had thought she was the gatekeeper of first class, but now she was just another casualty, crushed beneath the very gate she tried to guard. In economy class, Lena couldn't hear what was happening in the cockpit, but she didn't need to. She could feel the shift, the hushed whispers among passengers, the uneasy glance from Clara Evans as she passed by, the unnatural silence from first class. Lena knew Vanessa was finally feeling the weight of her mistakes, and that satisfied her, not out of revenge but because justice was being served. Clara returned with a warm towel, placing it gently on Lena's tray with slightly shaking hands. I heard Ms. Reed was called to the cockpit," Clara whispered, her voice small as if afraid someone might hear. "I don't know what's happening, but I'm so sorry for what she did to you. It was horrible." Lena looked up at Clara, her gaze softening slightly. "Thank you, Clara," she said, her voice warm but commanding. "You don't need to apologize for her. But I appreciate your kindness." Clara gave a weak smile before hurrying away, leaving Lena to her thoughts. The plane began its descent, the engines humming, a fitting backdrop to the downfall of Vanessa Reed. Inside the cockpit, Vanessa remained huddled on the floor, tears streaking down the face that once wore arrogance like armor. She was no longer the powerful chief flight attendant. She was a ghost, haunted by the consequences of her own actions. She thought of Lena, of the unsettling calmness in her eyes as she walked away from first class. And for the first time, Vanessa felt true fear, not of the airline's punishment, but of the realization that she had crossed paths with an opponent she could never defeat. As the airplane's wheels touched down at Chicago Airport, a loud thud echoed through the cabin, marking not just the end of the flight, but the end of Vanessa Reed. The cabin door swung open, and two security officers in black uniforms stepped inside, their cold eyes locked on the cockpit. Vanessa heard the heavy footsteps and her heart stopped. She knew they were here for her, and this time, there was no way out. In economy class, Lena stood up, smoothing out her blazer, now stained with dried coffee. Her eyes burned with unwavering determination. She didn't need to look back to know Vanessa had lost. This battle wasn't over, it had just begun. And Lena Brooks would make sure that the price wasn't paid by just one person, but by an entire system that had enabled such injustice. The sound of the wheels hitting the tarmac still echoed in Lena's mind as she stepped out of economy class, her dark blue blazer bearing the battle scars of spilled coffee like a war medal. The cold air from the jet bridge hit her face, making the skin on her neck and arms sting where the coffee had spilled. But Lena didn't care. Her brown eyes burned with a fire that could not be extinguished, not anger but an unshakable resolve, sharp as a freshly honed blade. She knew that somewhere behind her, Vanessa Reed was being escorted away by security, but she didn't turn back. She didn't need to. This fight was no longer about Vanessa. It had grown far beyond a single person. As Lena stepped into the arrivals area, a wave of whispers from Flight 392's passengers surrounded her like a chaotic symphony. Some people pointed. Others murmured. "That's her, the woman the flight attendant kicked out of first class." A young man, the same passenger who had recorded the first-class altercation, raised his phone as if to take a photo. But when Lena's icy gaze met his, he hesitated, his fingers twitching. Then awkwardly he lowered his phone and turned away. Lena didn't stop to acknowledge the stares or the murmurs. She walked straight ahead, to the baggage claim area, where a man in a sleek black suit was waiting. William Pierce. Her personal driver, always on time like a loyal shadow. "Miss Brooks," William greeted her, his voice calm and respectful as he opened the door of a black sedan polished to perfection. "Everything has been arranged. Would you like to go straight to the office or rest first?" His sharp eyes flicked to Lena's stained clothes, his expression briefly tightening with concern, but he knew better than to ask. "The office," Lena said, short, firm and without a trace of exhaustion. She slid into the back seat, rolling down the window slightly to breathe in the fresh air, to clear the lingering scent of dried coffee clinging to her. As the car pulled away, Lena reached for her phone, scanning a new message from Maya Torres. "The board is ready for the 8 p.m. conference call. I've sent a preliminary report on Vanessa Reed. She's had 3 prior complaints for mistreating passengers, but they were all dismissed. James is preparing legal documents in case you want to escalate this." Lena nodded in satisfaction, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she replied. "Good. Send that report to Richard now. I want them to see the problem before I speak." Meanwhile, at the Chicago headquarters of the airline, Richard Hale sat in a spacious boardroom, his hands clasped tightly on the polished oak table. Behind him, a massive glass wall overlooked the city skyline, where skyscrapers flickered like fire in the night. But inside the room, there was no peace. 7 other board members sat around the table, their expressions ranging from concern to anger. On the large screen mounted on the wall, a video played, the very clip a passenger had uploaded online. Vanessa ripping Lena's ticket. Vanessa dumping coffee on her. Vanessa screaming insults. The video had spread like wildfire, amassing thousands of furious comments and a viral hashtag. Hashtag justice for Lena. "We're in serious trouble," Richard said, his voice hoarse with tension. He drummed his fingers against the table, his gaze sweeping over each board member. "Lena Brooks is not just an ordinary passenger. She owns 8% of the company and has strong ties with major investors. If she wants to, she can bring us down, not with money but with reputation." Margaret Voss, the silver-haired vice chairwoman, frowned. "Then why don't we handle this quickly? Suspend Vanessa Reed, issue a public apology and move on." Richard let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "You think Lena will be satisfied with an apology, Margaret? She doesn't want a quick resolution. She wants blood, not Vanessa's but the system's. She's demanding a full-scale investigation and policy reform. If we refuse, she'll take us to court, and with that video we don't stand a chance." Thomas Kane, a heavy-set man whose face was flushed with anger, slammed his fist on the table. "Who does she think she is, threatening us like this? So what if she's a shareholder? We can buy her out and push her out of the company." Richard shook his head, his eyes darkening. "She's not just a shareholder, Thomas. She's a symbol, a successful black woman who was treated like garbage on one of our flights. If we go against her, the media will tear us apart. And I guarantee you she already has her lawyers lined up. We can't win this fight. At exactly 8 p.m., the conference phone rang, cutting through the heated debate. Richard signaled for silence and pressed the button to answer. Lena Brooks' voice came through the speaker, low, cold, and razor-sharp. "Good evening, gentlemen. I trust you've reviewed the report I had Maya send over. We have a lot of work to do and I don't like wasting time." Richard swallowed hard, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Lena, we deeply regret what happened. Vanessa Reed has been suspended, and we are launching an internal investigation. What more do you want?" A brief silence followed, just long enough for the tension in the room to become suffocating. Then Lena's voice cut through like a blade. "I don't want an apology, Richard," she said. "I want action. Vanessa Reed is not the problem, she's a symptom. Your airline ignored 3 prior complaints against her, and no one did anything. That tells me that you don't care about passengers, only profits. I want a complete reform, policies, training, and accountability. If not, I'll take this to court and I promise you won't like the outcome." Thomas Kane shot up from his chair, yelling into the speaker. "Who the hell do you think you are, giving us orders? We're not going to let some minor shareholder dictate how we run this airline." A small, cold laugh came from Lena. "Minor?" she echoed, her tone laced with disdain. "Mr. Kane, I own 8% of your company, and I can rally another 20% from other investors within 24 hours. I'm not running this airline, yet. But if you don't meet my demands, I will make sure this board doesn't exist to run anything at all. Would you like to test me?" Thomas turned an even deeper shade of red, about to shout again, but Margaret raised a hand to stop him. "Enough, Thomas," she said firmly. She turned to the speaker. "Miss Brooks, we understand your concerns. But full-scale reform takes time. What do you expect from us right now?" "I expect commitment," Lena replied, her voice unwavering. "I want a detailed plan within 48 hours, bias training for all employees, a transparent complaint handling process, and an independent oversight team of my choosing. If I don't receive it, I'll see you in court, with the press right beside me." Richard wiped his forehead, sweat trickling down his temple. "All right, Lena. We'll do it. But you have to give us time." 48 hours, Lena repeated, her voice a final slash of the blade. "I'm not negotiating. Have a good evening." The call ended with a sharp beep, leaving the boardroom in suffocating silence. In her car, Lena set down her phone and closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel her heartbeat racing, not from fear but from the adrenaline of power. She didn't enjoy making threats, she wasn't one for theatrics, but she knew that sometimes to change a system you had to make it tremble. She opened her eyes, gazing out the window at the city lights, glittering like fallen stars. This wasn't just about her. It was about others, people without a voice, people who were treated like trash simply because they didn't fit someone's mold. At her office, a sleek glass building in the heart of Chicago, Lena walked in just before 9 p.m. Maya Torres was waiting in the lobby, her eyes bright with a mix of excitement and nerves. "You did it," Maya said, handing Lena a cup of hot tea. "They're panicking. Richard just emailed, he confirmed they'll be in meetings all night drafting the plan." Lena took the cup, the warmth spreading through her cold fingers. "Good," she said, her voice low. "But I don't just want them panicked. I want them to act. Call James, I need him to prepare for the worst-case scenario in case they try to back out." Maya nodded but hesitated slightly. "Lena, are you sure? I mean, you've backed them into a corner. If they fight back, this could turn into an all-out war." Lena turned, her gaze locking onto Maya's. "I'm not afraid of a fight, Maya," she said, her voice steel. "I've had my ticket torn up, I've had coffee spilled on me, I've been humiliated in front of dozens of people. If I don't fight, then who will? This isn't just about me, it's about every person who's ever been treated like that and never got the chance to push back." Maya was silent for a moment, then nodded, the respect in her eyes clearer than ever. "You're right. I'll call James now." As Maya walked away, Lena stepped into her office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She set the tea down, shrugged off her stained blazer, revealing a black silk dress now crumpled and carrying the bitter scent of coffee. She glanced at the mirror on the wall, a woman with wild curls, exhausted eyes, and a fire that refused to die. She never wanted to be a hero, She didn't need fame or applause. But she knew her role in this airline wasn't just as a shareholder. She was the spark that would burn away the injustice that had festered for too long. That night, as the city fell asleep, Lena sat at her desk, opened her laptop and began to write. Not a plan. Not an email. A letter to herself. A reminder of why she was doing this. They will try to put out your fire, but you are not a candle. You are a flame, and a flame never asks permission to burn. She typed the final line, then shut her laptop, her gaze drifting into the darkness beyond the glass. The board had 48 hours. But Lena already knew, no matter what they did, she had changed the game forever. Lena Brooks stood before the glass wall of her office, the lights of Chicago flickering like tiny embers in the vast darkness of the night. The dry, bitter scent of coffee still clung to her black silk dress, but she made no move to change. It was a vivid reminder of what had happened on Flight 392, of the fire she had ignited, now spreading beyond anyone's control. The clock on her desk neared midnight, but Lena had no intention of resting. She had just sent a final memo to James Carter, instructing him to prepare additional legal documents in case the airline's board failed to uphold their promises in the next 48 hours. Yet deep down she knew this fight was no longer just about an airline. It had become a movement, a wave she neither could nor wanted to stop. A soft knock at the door pulled Lena from her thoughts. Maya Torres stepped in, eyes bright with a mix of excitement and tension, holding a thick folder. "Lena," she said, her voice trembling slightly with adrenaline. "The board just sent over a preliminary plan. They worked through the night just as you demanded. Here's the draft: mandatory bias training for all employees, a new complaint handling process, and an independent oversight team. They want you to review it before making anything official." Lena turned, locking eyes with Maya for a brief moment before stepping toward her desk. She picked up the folder, flipping through the pages with razor-sharp focus, like a lawyer preparing for trial. The text was dense, the commitments written in the rigid language of corporate policies, but Lena didn't care about appearances, she cared about substance. She needed to be sure this wasn't just a PR stunt to pacify public outrage. "Who are they proposing for the oversight team?" she asked, her voice low but commanding. Maya pointed to a section near the end. "They're suggesting an external group, an independent consulting firm from New York with a strong reputation. But they've stated you have veto power and can nominate your own candidates." Lena nodded, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Good. Call Sarah Nguyen in D.C. She's an expert in corporate equity and I trust her. I want her leading this oversight team." She set the folder down, her eyes now blazing with a vision far beyond this single case. "And Maya, I need you to reach out to other airlines, Delta, United, American. Send them a summary of this case and the reform plan. This isn't just one airline's problem, it's an industry problem." Maya's eyes widened in surprise at the scope of Lena's ambition. "You want to turn this into an industry-wide movement? Lena, if you do this, you'll be up against some very powerful people. They won't like being forced to change." Lena stepped closer, resting a firm yet reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder, a quiet force impossible to resist. "I'm not forcing them to change, Maya," she said, her voice steady as a vow. "I'm giving them a chance not to be left behind. If they don't change on their own, public pressure will do it for them, and I'll make sure of that." She let go, turning back to the window, her reflection merging with the shimmering city lights, a silent promise written in fire. Meanwhile, at airline headquarters, tension hung thick in the boardroom like an impending storm. Richard Hale sat at the head of the table, dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night, a cup of cold black coffee resting untouched in his grip. The board had spent hours locked in heated debates over how to respond to Lena's demands. Thomas Kane, his face flushed red with anger, slammed his fist on the table for the third time that night. "She's turning us into a joke," he roared, his voice hoarse. "We're an airline, not a goddamn social reform charity. I say we fight back, hire the best lawyers we can and take this battle to the end." Margaret Voss shook her head, her gaze steely. "Thomas, don't you see? We can't win against her in court, not with that video, not with public outrage mounting outside. If we fight this, our stock will nosedive and investors will abandon us. Lena doesn't just have money, she has the power of righteousness." Richard rubbed his forehead, his voice weary but resolute. "Margaret's right. We don't have a choice. This plan has to be announced and we have to do it the right way. If we don't, Lena won't just destroy us, she'll turn us into an example for the entire airline industry." His eyes swept across the table, pausing on each board member like a silent warning. "We'll approve this plan first thing in the morning, and I want everyone prepared, because this is only the beginning. The next morning, as the sun broke over the Chicago skyline, the airline issued its official statement. A post on their website, accompanied by a short video from Richard Hale, flooded every social media platform. We sincerely apologize for the incident on Flight 392. The actions of our employees were unacceptable, and we are committed to comprehensive reform, mandatory bias training, a transparent complaint process, and an independent oversight team. This is the first step in ensuring that every passenger is treated with the respect they deserve. The video quickly racked up millions of views, sparking thousands of comments, ranging from praise to skepticism. But no one could deny that Lena Brooks had forced an airline to its knees. In her office, Lena watched the video on her laptop, her lips curling into a satisfied, but not content, smile. She knew this wasn't the final victory, this was only the beginning. Her phone rang. She picked up immediately. Sarah Nguyen's voice came through, steady and full of energy. Lena, I just got an invitation from the airline. They want me to lead the oversight team. You had something to do with this, didn't you? That's right, Lena replied, her voice calm but firm. I need someone I trust, Sarah. Someone who knows how to do this right, no compromises, no cover-ups. Will you take it? Sarah laughed, the sound ringing through the speaker. Take it? I was born for this. But Lena, you should know, other airlines are starting to pay attention. I just got an email from United. They want to meet to discuss their policies. You've started a wildfire. Lena nodded, her eyes gleaming with fresh determination. Good. Let it burn, Sarah. I want this entire industry to feel the heat. She ended the call, stood up, and walked to the window, looking out over the city as it stirred to life. News of the airline's reforms was spreading fast, headlines flashing across media outlets. Some dramatic, like shareholders force airline to apologize, others deep diving into the systemic biases within the industry. Lena's name was everywhere, but she didn't care about the spotlight, she cared about the impact. But not everyone was pleased with what she had set in motion. At Delta Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, a group of senior executives gathered in a dimly lit conference room, their faces illuminated by the glow of a projector screen. Jonathan Pierce, Delta's CEO, tapped his fingers against the table, his expression dark as he read the email Maya Torres had sent on Lena's orders. His voice was a low growl, heavy with restrained fury. Who the hell does she think she is? Jonathan snarled. A shareholder in another airline sending recommendations to us? This is an insult. A woman with golden blonde hair, Elizabeth Grant, Delta's head of human resources, shrugged. It may be insulting, but she's not wrong. If we don't review our policies, we could be the next target. Public opinion is on her side, and that video, it's too powerful. We don't want to get caught in this storm. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, making the water glass tremble. I don't care what the public thinks. We do not bow to some woman who thinks she's the savior of the airline industry. I want her stopped. Find a way, any way. Elizabeth tilted her head, her gaze cold yet calculating. If you want to stop her, you'll need more than words. Lena Brooks isn't acting alone. She has lawyers, connections, and the media. We can try, but if we fail, the consequences will be far worse. Meanwhile, Lena was unaware of the meeting in Atlanta, but she could feel the pressure mounting. Her phone rang again, this time it was James Carter. Lena, his voice was urgent. I just got word from an internal source. Delta and American are holding private meetings. It looks like they don't want your ideas spreading. You need to be ready, they might push back. Lena took a deep breath, her gaze darkening but unwavering. They want to play? She said, her voice now a challenge. Fine. Call Sarah and tell her to accelerate the oversight team's progress. I want our plan announced before they have a chance to act. And James, find me everything on Jonathan Pierce of Delta. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one to remember. James chuckled, excitement clear in his tone. You really are the fire, Lena? I'll get right on it. The call ended and Lena turned back to her desk, opening her laptop once more. She knew resistance from other airlines was inevitable. She had challenged a multi-billion-dollar industry and they wouldn't sit still. But Lena wasn't afraid. She had survived Flight 392, the humiliation from Vanessa Reed, and the doubtful stares from the boardroom. She would survive this too, and more than that, she would win. The next day, the airline's reform plan was publicly released, accompanied by a short speech from Lena, recorded in her office. In the video, she stood before the glass wall, her sharp eyes locking onto the camera. "I'm not doing this for fame or power. I'm doing this because every passenger deserves respect, no matter who they are." The incident on Flight 392 wasn't an accident. It was the result of a system that has ignored injustice for too long. Today we start changing that, not just here but everywhere. The video ended with Lena turning away, her silhouette blending into the city lights, strong and unstoppable. The video spread rapidly and other airlines began to react. United announced an internal review of their policies, while American released a vague statement about their commitment to passengers. But Delta, under Jonathan Pierce's leadership, remained silent, a silence that felt ominous. And Lena knew, this was the calm before the storm. In her office, Lena sat down, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her gaze fixed on the city outside. She could feel the weight of what she had set in motion, not just a change within one airline but a ripple effect that could shake an entire industry. But with that came the pressure, the loneliness of standing at the eye of the storm. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "You can't stop. Not now." When she opened her eyes, the city lights reflected in them, and Lena knew that the fire she had ignited would never go out, it would burn until everything changed. Vanessa Reed curled up in her small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, the dim glow of an old desk lamp casting shadows on her face, a face that had once held arrogance, now hollowed by regret. The room was suffocatingly silent, the only sound the steady ticking of the wall clock, a relentless reminder of the time that had passed since she was escorted off Flight 392 by security. On the table before her lay the official termination notice from the airline, a cold, white sheet of paper stamped with a red seal and rigid words, "Severe violation of company policy, immediate termination." Beside it, her phone screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and unread messages from friends, family and former colleagues. But Vanessa couldn't bring herself to look at them. She already knew what they would say: pity, condemnation, or worse, silence from those who once respected her. It had been 3 days since the plane had landed. 3 days since Vanessa had lost everything: her job, her reputation, and the confidence she had spent 8 years building as a flight attendant. She still remembered the heavy footsteps of the security team, their cold stares as they ordered her to leave the cockpit, and the whispers of passengers as she was led through first class, a place where she had once ruled, now reduced to a disgrace. But the most haunting memory wasn't any of that. It was the image of Lena Brooks, calm, composed, walking out of first class without a word of protest. Vanessa had thought that was weakness. Now she realized it was strength, a kind of strength she had never understood until it crushed her. She stood up, her legs trembling beneath her, and walked to the mirror on the wall. The face staring back at her was almost unrecognizable: pale skin, dark circles, red-rimmed blue eyes stripped of all pride. She raised a hand to the mirror as if trying to grasp the person she once was, but all she saw was a failure. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice breaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. A sob rose in her throat, raw and uncontrollable, and she sank to the floor, burying her face in shaking hands. She had lost everything, not just her job but her dignity, her belief in herself, and any reason to wake up in the morning. Meanwhile, in downtown Chicago, Lena Brooks was leading a video meeting with Sarah Nguyen and the independent oversight team. The glow of her laptop screen illuminated her face, highlighting the fire in her deep brown eyes, unshaken, relentless. "We need to move faster," Lena said, her voice low but sharp. "The airline has made its commitment, but I want to see results, not just on paper but in action." "Sarah, have you started the training?" Sarah nodded, her sleek black hair shifting slightly on the screen. "We begin next week. The entire airline crew will undergo a 3-day anti-bias training program. I designed it based on the data from your case, Lena, focusing on recognizing unconscious bias and handling situations without abusing authority. Ms. Reed is a prime example of what we're trying to prevent." Lena nodded, but a flicker of complexity passed through her eyes at the mention of Vanessa's name. She took no joy in Vanessa's downfall. She wasn't someone who relished others' suffering. But she also couldn't deny that Vanessa's actions had created an opportunity for change, and she wasn't about to waste it. "Good," she said evenly. "I want weekly reports from you, Sarah. And if there's any sign that the airline isn't complying, I need to know immediately. Sarah smiled, respect shining in her eyes. You don't have to worry, Lena. I'll keep them in check. But you know, the other airlines are starting to move. Delta just sent me a private invitation. Looks like they want to protect themselves before you come knocking. For the first time that day, Lena let out a small smile, but it was the smile of someone who knew she held the power. They can invite you all they want, but I want them to feel the pressure first. Let them wonder if they're next. We're not just changing one airline, we're changing the entire industry. As the meeting ended, Lena shut her laptop and stood up, walking to the window. She didn't know that, somewhere else in the city, Vanessa Reed was facing a battle far more brutal than any Lena had ever fought, a battle within herself. Vanessa finally pushed herself up from the floor, wiping her tears on her sleeve. She walked to the table, picked up the termination letter, and read it for the 10th time that day as if hoping the words would change. But they didn't. They were final, a cold, unyielding sentence that marked the end of a chapter in her life. With a frustrated cry, she threw the paper down and let out a raw, anguished scream, the sound echoing through her empty apartment. Why me? She yelled, slamming her fists against the table until her knuckles turned red. But deep down she knew the answer. She had done this to herself and no one else was to blame. Her phone screen lit up again. This time, a message from Derek Miles, the senior colleague who had warned her on the flight. She hesitated, then finally opened it. Vanessa, I know you're struggling. I'm not excusing what you did, but if you need to talk, I'm here. Don't destroy yourself over this. The message was short, but it hit Vanessa like a punch to the gut. She hadn't expected kindness, not after everything. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard before she typed. Thank you, Derek. I don't deserve that. I don't know what to do anymore. Derek's response came almost instantly. You were wrong, but that doesn't mean you can't make it right. Think about what you can do now, not just what you've lost. His words were a small flicker of light in the suffocating darkness Vanessa had been drowning in. And for the first time in 3 days she felt something, fragile, faint, but real. Oh. She stood up and walked toward her old laptop on the kitchen counter. Her hands still shook as she powered it on and typed Lena Brooks into the search bar. Countless articles and videos popped up. Coverage of Flight 392, Lena's speech on industry reform, and interviews with passengers and advocates. Vanessa clicked on a video of Lena's speech, and her voice filled the quiet apartment, steady and unrelenting. I'm not doing this for fame or power. I'm doing this because every passenger deserves respect, no matter who they are. Vanessa stared at the woman on the screen, sharp-eyed, poised, exuding a strength she hadn't been able to grasp that day. For the first time she didn't feel anger or resentment. She felt shame. And, unexpectedly, a reluctant sense of admiration stirred inside her. She turned off the video, sat still in the darkness and began to cry, not for what she had lost, but for realizing just how wrong she had been. She thought about Lena, about how she had remained calm in the face of humiliation, how she had turned pain into strength to challenge an entire system. Vanessa understood now that she couldn't undo the past, but she could choose how to move forward. She opened a new document on her laptop, and with hands still trembling she began to type, not to justify herself but to apologize. Dear Miss Brooks, she wrote, her words clumsy but sincere. My name is Vanessa Reed, the person who treated you so poorly on Flight 392. I have no excuse for my actions. I was wrong. Wrong because of my prejudice, wrong because of my arrogance, and wrong because I believed I had the right to judge you. What I did was unforgivable and I have paid for it with my job. But I am not writing this letter to seek your pity. I am writing to say that I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart. You have made me confront myself and I want to change. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope this apology reaches you. Vanessa paused, tears streaming down her face as she reread what she had written. She didn't know if Lena would ever see this letter, but writing it made her feel lighter, as if part of the weight she had been carrying had been lifted. She sent the email to Lena's public contact address, not expecting a reply, then shut her laptop and sat in the darkness. But this time, the darkness no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a beginning, a chance to find herself again. A week later, Vanessa received an unexpected call from a non-profit organization focused on workplace equality. The caller, a woman with a gentle voice named Laura Bennett, explained that they had heard about Vanessa's story through an internal source. We're looking for someone with real-world experience to speak about bias in the workplace, Laura said. We know you made mistakes, but we also believe you can help others learn from them. Would you be interested? Vanessa hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't think she deserved this opportunity, not after everything she had done. But she remembered Derek's message, the letter she had sent to Lena, and a small spark of hope flickered inside her. I'd like to try, she said, her voice shaky. I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I want to try. Laura smiled through the phone, her voice warm. That's enough, Vanessa. We'll start from there. As Vanessa took the first steps on her journey toward redemption, Lena received her email one early morning at her office. She read it in silence, her brown eyes flickering first with surprise, then deep thought. She didn't feel satisfaction or anger, only a quiet complexity that was hard to define. Vanessa had never been her enemy, she had only been a symptom of a much larger system that Lena was fighting to change. Lena typed a short reply. Thank you for your email, Vanessa. I accept your apology and I hope you turn your words into action. Best of luck. She hit send, then stood up and walked to the window. She didn't know what Vanessa would do with this chance, but she hoped, not for Vanessa's sake but for the people she might one day help. On the horizon, the sun was rising, and Lena knew that the fire she had ignited wasn't just changing the airline industry, it was changing the people within it, one person at a time. The early sunlight streamed through the glass walls of Lena Brooks' office, casting a golden hue on the wooden floor and accentuating the sharp lines of her face. It had been a month since Flight 392, a month since she had turned personal humiliation into a wave of change sweeping across the airline industry. On her desk lay a stack of reports from Sarah and Gwyn, numbers and charts indicating that the airline's anti-bias training program was starting to take effect. Over 80% of the crew had completed the course, and complaints about discriminatory behavior had significantly decreased. But Lena didn't smile as she read them. She knew these numbers were only the surface. True change required time, persistence, and a fire that never burned out. She stood up, walking to the window, her brown eyes fixed on the Chicago skyline, where skyscrapers pierced the sky like spears. Vanessa Reed's apology email, which she had received weeks ago, still echoed in her mind. It hadn't made her feel victorious, it had made her feel responsible, burdened with a weight she couldn't ignore. Lena hadn't fought this battle to punish Vanessa or to satisfy her own ego, she had fought so that no one else would have to endure what she had. So that every passenger, regardless of their race or background, would be treated with basic respect. But she also knew this fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Maya Torres stepped in, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Lena, Maya said urgently. Big news. Delta just announced they're launching a similar training program, not officially acknowledging your influence, but it's clear they're following your lead. And she hesitated, handing Lena a printed email. Jonathan Pierce from Delta just sent you a direct message. He wants a meeting. Lena took the paper, scanning the rigid yet carefully worded lines. Miss Brooks, I understand that you've made waves in our industry. I would like to discuss how we might work together, or at the very least, avoid unnecessary conflict. I will be in Chicago next week. Let me know if you agree to meet. Lena set the paper down, her expression darkening with cautious intrigue. Jonathan Pierce, the man who had once vowed to shut her down, was now waving a white flag. Or was it a trap? What does he want? Lena asked, her voice low but razor-sharp. Collaboration or just a way to contain me? Maya shrugged, a flicker of concern in her eyes. I'm not sure, Lena. But he knows you're a force to be reckoned with. Maybe he's afraid Delta will be next, especially after your video went viral. Or maybe he's plotting something. Will you meet him? Lena was silent, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk in a rhythmic pattern of calculation. She knew Jonathan Pierce wasn't the kind of man to surrender easily. He was a seasoned fox in the airline industry with decades of experience and a web of powerful connections. But she also knew she couldn't back down, not now when the fire she had ignited was spreading across the industry. I'll meet him, she finally said, her voice cold but resolute. But not to collaborate, to show him that I'm not stopping. Schedule a meeting with James and Sarah first. I want to be one step ahead of him. Maya nodded, the admiration in her eyes clearer than ever. You're really not afraid of anyone, are you, Lena? Lena turned back, locking eyes with Maya. Of course I'm afraid, Maya, she said, her voice carrying an unusual softness. I'm afraid of failing, Not for myself but for the people who believe in me. But that fear doesn't hold me back, it pushes me forward. She allowed herself a small smile before motioning for Maya to leave. When the door closed, Lena sat down, opened her leather-bound notebook and wrote a new line. Accountability is the beginning, but perseverance is the fire that keeps it alive. As Lena prepared for her confrontation with Jonathan Pierce, across the city, Vanessa Reed stepped into the small office of the nonprofit organization where she had just started her new job. She wore a simple white blouse, her blonde hair neatly tied back. Gone was the arrogance of the former chief flight attendant who once ruled the first-class cabin. Laura Bennett, the organization's director, greeted her with a warm but firm smile. "Welcome, Vanessa," Laura said, handing her a folder. "Today is your first day. We're holding a workshop for service industry employees, and I'd like you to share your story." Vanessa swallowed hard, clutching the folder tightly. "Share my story?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "You mean, talk about what I did on Flight 392? Laura nodded, her gaze steady. "That's right. Not to shame you but to show them the consequences of bias, and how someone can change after a mistake. Are you ready?" Vanessa felt her heart pounding, her chest tightening with fear and shame. She had never spoken about that day to anyone except in the letter she sent to Lena, and now she was expected to stand before dozens of strangers and expose the worst mistake of her life. But she thought of Derek Miles' words, of the small glimmer of hope she had held onto when she accepted this job. I'll try," she said, her voice small but determined. "I won't promise I'll do it well, but I want to try." Laura smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Vanessa's shoulder. "That's enough, Vanessa. Let's start from there." The workshop took place that afternoon at a community center in Chicago. Vanessa stood on the stage, facing about 50 people, hotel staff, bus drivers, and even a few flight attendants from smaller airlines. Her hands trembled as she gripped the microphone, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for courage in the faces of strangers. My name is Vanessa Reed," she began, her voice cracking under the weight of her nerves. "A month ago I was the lead flight attendant on Flight 392. And I did something I will regret for the rest of my life." She paused, taking a deep breath, and then the story spilled out of her like a flood she could no longer contain. She spoke about Lena Brooks, the woman she had humiliated because of her own prejudices. She described how she had ripped up Lena's ticket, spilled coffee on her, and thrown her out of first class with hateful words. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a few people shaking their heads, but Vanessa didn't stop. She talked about the aftermath, the firing, the isolation, and the complete collapse of the arrogant person she had once been. Her voice broke as she admitted, "I thought I had the right to judge others, but I was wrong. And the price I paid wasn't just my job, it was my own sense of self-worth." The air in the room grew heavier, but Vanessa pressed on, her eyes now shining with newfound determination. "I'm not standing here asking for your pity," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm standing here to tell you that prejudice doesn't just destroy others, it destroys us too. I lost everything but I'm trying to rebuild, not to go back to who I was but to become someone better. I hope none of you make the same mistake I did." As she stepped down from the stage, a hesitant applause rippled through the crowd, then grew into something louder. Vanessa stood still, tears streaming down her face, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from a sense of relief she had never felt before. Laura walked up and pulled her into a warm embrace. "You did it, Vanessa," she whispered. "This is the first step." Meanwhile, in Lena's office, the meeting with James Carter and Sarah Nguyen was tense, the atmosphere wound as tight as a coiled spring. James slammed a folder onto the table, his voice urgent. "Lena, I dug into Jonathan Pierce. He's not just meeting you to smooth things over, he's secretly aligning with American Airlines to form a coalition against your movement. They're calling it the Airline Standards Alliance. Sounds noble, but it's really just a shield to protect their interests and stop you from gaining more influence." Sarah tilted her head, her gaze razor-sharp. "They're afraid of you, Lena. Delta and American can spend millions smearing you in the media if they want. You need a counter-strategy right now." Lena stood, planting her hands firmly on the desk, her presence commanding. "They want a fight?" she said, her voice low and laced with menace. "Fine. Sarah, accelerate the training program. I want it completed before Jonathan arrives in Chicago. James, prepare a media campaign, not to retaliate but to lead. I want people to see that we're not just changing one airline, We're reshaping the industry. If they want an alliance, I'll show them what a real movement looks like." James let out a laugh, excitement crackling in his voice. "You really are a storm, Lena? I'll get on it." Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "They have no idea what kind of hornet's nest they just kicked. I'll make this program the new industry standard, something they can't ignore." As the two left, Lena sat back down, her gaze drifting toward the window. She could feel the weight of what she was doing, not just challenging a system but going up against forces far bigger than herself. But she wasn't afraid. She had survived Flight 392, Vanessa's humiliation, and the board's scheming. She would survive this too, and she would emerge stronger than ever. A week later, Lena walked into a high-end restaurant in downtown Chicago to meet Jonathan Pierce. He had arrived before her, seated in a corner booth, a glass of red wine in hand, his sharp eyes watching her like a hawk sizing up its prey. Lena wore a sleek black suit, her curls cascading down her shoulders in defiant elegance. Every step she took radiated a power that could not be ignored. As she sat down, Jonathan smiled, but it was the smile of a man holding a knife behind his back. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice smooth and deep, "you've certainly stirred things up in our industry. I'm here to offer a deal. You step back and we work together to keep everything stable. No one wants a war, right?" Lena tilted her head, her gaze locking onto his like an arrow aimed at its target. "Mr. Pierce," she replied, her voice cold as ice, "I'm not here to keep things stable. I'm here to change them. If you think a glass of wine and a few empty promises will make me stop, you've got the wrong person. I don't stop, not ever. You can either stand with me or be left behind. The choice is yours." Jonathan stiffened, the smile on his lips vanishing. "Are you threatening me?" he growled, his voice low but seething with anger. "No," Lena said, rising to her feet with a movement that was both graceful and commanding. "I'm warning you. The fire has started and it won't go out. If you want a fight, I'm ready." She turned and walked away, leaving the restaurant without a backward glance, while Jonathan sat frozen, his wine glass trembling in his grip. But the story doesn't end here. As Lena stepped outside, the city lights illuminated her silhouette, and a quiet smile played on her lips. She knew Jonathan wouldn't give up easily. He would come back with a stronger alliance, with bigger schemes. But Lena also knew she wasn't alone. She had Sarah, James, Maya, and even Vanessa, people standing beside her, keeping the fire alive. And somewhere ahead, a new chapter awaited, a chapter filled with drama, challenges, and hope. What do you think of this ending? Lena Brooks has ignited a fire that cannot be extinguished, but what will Jonathan Pierce and his alliance do to fight back? Can Vanessa Reed truly redeem herself? If you want to see part 2, where Lena faces even greater forces and Vanessa finds her own path, leave a comment below and hit subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll be back with even more thrilling twists. Thank you for being part of this story.